Hear these words now from the Gospel of Luke, the 12th chapter. Jesus is teaching, and he says, "Do not be afraid, little flock, for it is your Father's good pleasure to give you the kingdom. Sell your possessions and give alms. Make purses for yourselves that do not wear out, an unfailing treasure in heaven, where no thief comes near and no moth destroys. For where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. Be dressed for action and have your lamps lit. Be like those who are waiting for their master to return from a wedding banquet, so that they may open the door for him as soon as he comes and knocks. Blessed are those slaves whom the master finds alert when he comes. Truly, I tell you, he will fasten his belt and have them sit down to eat. And he will come and serve them. If he comes during the middle of the night or near dawn and finds them so, blessed are those slaves. But know this, if the owner of the house had known at what hour the thief was coming, he would not have let his house be broken into. You also must be ready, for the Son of Man is coming in an unexpected hour." Peter said, "Lord, are you telling this parable for us or for everyone?" And the Lord said, "Who then is the faithful and prudent manager whom his master will put in charge of his slaves to give them their allowance of food at the proper time? Blessed is the slave whom his master will find at work when he arrives. Truly, I tell you, he will put that one in charge of all his possessions. But if that slave says to himself, 'My master is delayed in coming,' and if he begins to beat the other slaves, men and women, and to eat and drink and get drunk, the master of that slave will come on a day when he does not expect him, and at an hour he does not know, and will cut him to pieces and put him with the unfaithful. That slave who knew what his master wanted but did not prepare himself or do what was wanted will receive a severe beating. But the one who did not know and did what deserved a beating will receive a light beating. And from everyone to whom much has been given, much will be required. And from the one to whom much has been entrusted, even more will be demanded." This is the word of the Lord. Thanks be to God. Well, we saw our children, our students up front this morning. And, as a parent myself, I'm familiar with the question, why? Why is the sky blue? Or why is grass green? Or why does school start earlier and earlier every year? Why can't I do this? Why can't I have that? And when we become adults, we ask lots of why questions too. They're different questions like, why can't I have this? Or why can't I do that? Maybe some of us ask, why are there so many traffic circles around here? Actually, I'm pro-traffic circle, by the way, just to put that out there. But why? I mean, we can ask why, right? All day long if we find ourselves in that mood. And for most of us, and most of the time, it's kind of innocent and fair enough to ask these why questions. But then there are the why questions that dig at our souls, right? Like, why won't this work? Why can't I seem to get it together? Why does this keep happening? Why? As a child, I related to the frustration very frequently of this guy. We've got a picture for you here. Well, there we go. We know frustration. Charlie Brown voiced it and expressed it so well for us. Here's another image. I love that. Here's another one. And one more. Arg. right? Always went after that football, and Lucy always pulled it back just at the right time or wrong time. Why? Why can't I seem to make this work? As a child, I just voiced so much of why are things so hard? Why can't I learn how to do this? Why do I struggle so much? Why? And certainly there are people and times of our lives that we get stuck in the whys, and sometimes people lose hope, and maybe even, it goes so far as to take them to a place where they give up on life. And what I want to say here is that, if that's you, I hope you will get the help that you need, or someone that you know. I hope certainly that you will get the help that you'll need. But that's not exactly what we're talking about today. We're talking about a different kind of despair than that. One in which we all, too many of us, and at times I think we all do this, give in too easily. We settle in and we get really cozy with a question. The question is this: why bother? Why bother? Why bother seeking connection and joy and meaning and significance and purpose and relationship and community and communion with God? Why bother? Why bother finding my place in the world and a place and a way in which I can make a difference for other people? For many of us out in the world today, and sometimes this is us, we ask that question and it takes us to a place where we end up just settling right in where we are, and we're going to get what we can get, and we're going to take what we can take, and we're going to make the best of life that we can, right? And so maybe we forego seeking after some really great things by settling for some good things. And let me give you some examples of what I mean by that. We'll just settle for seeking attention rather than really finding relationship, because relationship seems too much to hope for. Or we'll settle for seeking pleasure rather than finding joy. Or we'll settle seeking stuff and status if we can find them and get them, rather than significance. Or if we can, success, if we can work hard enough and dig hard enough and connect with the right kind of people. But we'll go after success rather than purpose, or knowledge that we can leverage rather than wisdom. You see, those are all good things, but there are some really great things that we could go after too, right? And so many people, I think, around us, we're going after the good things and filling ourselves with those good things, and we gorge ourselves on them, and we miss out on the deeper things, the better things in life. And so there are many people today who are starving for significance, for instance. And they're dissatisfied with the attention and pleasure and stuff and status, so they just keep seeking more. And no wonder people get angry or depressed and start seeking community, for instance, in the wrong places. And we find the rise of hate groups, right? Because people are looking for community, and rather they find like-mindedness in scapegoating others. People who are starved for the great things, the significant things, the meaningful things, but seeking after the pleasureful things. Starve. And the voices that say, "Why bother?" get even louder. Many people are asking why bother. They're asking why bother these days in the face of violence that just seems to keep happening. First, we ask the question why when it happens. But when it happens over and over and over and over again, we begin to get cynical, we begin to get depressed, and we begin to ask, oh, why bother? It just keeps happening. There's nothing I can do about it. Why bother? And unfortunately, such thinking is actually encouraged by many of the good things that we have in life. Again, because we fill ourselves with good things and starve for great things. I'm going to give you an example of a good thing that can actually starve us of a great thing. Our technology is one of those things. I've often related to you how when you go to tourist sites and or these wonderful, our national parks, for instance, and you sit there in these some of the most beautiful places in creation that God's hand wrought, and people are there not looking at it, right? What are they looking at? Their phones, because they're taking pictures of that great thing. And I'm guilty of that. I'll have my camera out. But it's just amazing how we miss the great, the exceptional, the amazing, the magnificent for the merely good. Dr. Robert Lustig talks about how our technology does that. It kind of conditions us to do that. He says that our phones, our social media, they are tools that hack our brain. He actually uses the word hack to simulate pleasure cravings, or to stimulate, pleasure cravings. And so, like any addict, there's a cycle of chasing pleasure. And he says anytime you post something and somebody likes it, you get a little jolt from that. You get a little pleasure from that. And you go to seeking more, and that's actually replacing community, right? It's replacing relationship. You're seeking a good thing and starving for a great thing. He talks about when if you're a sports fan, if your team wins, that's a jolt of pleasure, right? He talks about binge watching your favorite TV show, But those are fleeting things. And he says pleasure and rewards are short-lived, but what he calls happiness, and I want to use the theological term joy, pleasure and rewards are short-lived, joy and contentment last longer. Pleasure is exciting, visceral. Joy is ethereal and calming. Pleasure occurs when you get something. Joy occurs or results from giving our time or money to others. Pleasure is often experienced alone. Joy is experienced connected to others. Pleasure is often achieved with substances, he goes on. Caffeine, cigarettes, alcohol, drugs, sugar. Joy is achieved with deeds or successes. Here's the crux. Here's the really interesting part. He talks about how pleasure is related to the release of dopamine in our system, right? And he says that will actually prevent then the release of serotonin, which is the chemical in our body that makes us feel more of the joy feelings, more of the wellness feelings. Now, if you know this stuff better than I do, don't laugh at me, okay? But that's the best I can translate it for you or understand it. And he says that seeking pleasure like that and gorging ourselves on all those avenues for pleasure like we do actually prevents us from then being able to fill up on the good, significant things like we're talking about. So he says, make the effort to connect with others. Make the effort to contribute to others and the betterment of their lives. Make the effort to take care of yourselves and seek those good things. Now, here's why I bring this up in relation to our question, why bother? It might seem that the deck is really stacked against us in seeking things of significance in a culture that often grabs at the pleasurable or the glitzy or the what's right there, right? Convenient. It's another instance, if we'll let it, where we might feel more and more like, why bother? Why bother? This is out there. I'm just going to take it and make the best of life. Why bother seeking more out of it? Why bother hoping for more out of life? Do you see that? And so often people go to that place where either out of despair or just out of the temptations of the world, they allow themselves to starve for the great because of the good. Well, I have some great news for you. I was going to say good news, but I think it's great news. The first words we heard from Jesus this morning in Luke's gospel is an answer to the question, why bother? Why bother, we might ask? Jesus says, "Do not be afraid, little flock, for it is your Father's good pleasure to give you the kingdom." Did you hear that? It is your Father's good pleasure to give you the kingdom. That's our why bother. And it's a big one. In fact, it's so much the answer to that question that we're to go out and sell our possessions and to give alms and to make purses for ourselves that don't wear out. Seek an unfailing treasure in heaven because it's worth it. It's more than worth it. It's worth letting go of some of those good things in life to know that we can work for and find and achieve better things, more significant things, more substantial things, more important things, things we can share with other people. And then he goes on to talk about how God's going to return and bring the kingdom of heaven, right? And how we're to be watchful. And a lot of people have taken that to mean, well, we have to be ready for God to return and then take us away from here, right? You've probably heard that at one point or another, like those Left Behind series where we all get raptured, or some of us do. You need to make sure you're on the right side of that, right? But the interesting thing about this is it's actually God returning and bringing the kingdom with him, and it will be good for those who are here working towards it. Because if you've been given the tools to the keys, if you've been given the tools to bring about the kingdom, if you've been given the keys to the kingdom, then we're expected to do that. We're expected to work for the kingdom, to seek the good thing, the great things in life. He talks about, in Hebrews, Paul's letter to the Hebrews, he talks about Abraham who desired a better country, that is, a heavenly one. Did you hear that in the last verse that Carolyn read? God indeed has prepared a city for them. For those who seek God's heavenly kingdom, it is prepared. Now, with Abraham, he was talking about the promised land and the Israelites, but this is our promised land, the kingdom of heaven, the kingdom of God that Jesus is to usher in, and it's our hope and indeed our faith, as Paul talks about it, that assurance of things that we hope for, but do not yet always see. And it's important to remember that when we talk about the kingdom of heaven, we're not just talking about the next life. We're talking about the things in this life, the kingdom things that we can work for in this one. Seek ye first the kingdom, Jesus said, and we sang a little while ago. Seek it now in this life. And so we've been promised this, and we've been, in fact, told we're expected to work for it. And it is ours to find and to nurture and to coax and to tease out in the world, to make a difference. So not only is it a waste of time and breath to ask the question, why bother? But it's actually contrary to the work that God is giving us to do and promised God would bring for us. Why bother? Because it's worth it. Why bother? Because God has promised to give it to us. It's worth forgoing attention-seeking in order to work for real and right relationships, which is, by the way, the biblical definition of righteousness, right relationship. It's worth foregoing pleasure, not because pleasure is bad per se, but because joy is greater and so worth it. And it's worth foregoing stuff and status, or at least keeping them in perspective, right? To seek significance. And it's worth foregoing success at all costs to seek and pursue real and godly pleasure, real and godly purpose, And it's worth foregoing knowledge that we can use for profit and to exploit others to seek godly wisdom. It's worth it. It's worth working to make a difference in the lives of others, even at the cost of some nice things for ourselves. It's worth it. Even when all around seems frustrating and seems so defeating, and we want to ask, why bother? Don't. God has promised it will make a difference if we seek the things of the kingdom. It's worth it. And it's worth it when you know the value of these great things, and it's worth it when you know the value of people. And when you've had a taste of God's heavenly kingdom, once you've had that, there's no going back. Why bother? Because it is so worth it. The kingdom is worth it. And God has promised the kingdom for you and for me. Amen.